Today we're breaking down a dramatic escalation in US-Latin America relations that is sending shockwaves through global diplomacy, energy markets, and international law. US President Donald Trump has announced what he calls a total and complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela. So what exactly has Trump ordered? What does it mean for Venezuela and the world? And is this blockade even legal? Let's deep dive. On Tuesday, President Trump took to social media in all caps to declare a naval blockade on sanctioned oil tankers operating in and out of Venezuela. He has also characterized Venezuela's government as a foreign terrorist organization, accused it of stealing U.S. oil and land, as well as claimed Caracas was using stolen oil to finance drug trafficking, human trafficking, and terrorism, which Caracas denies. The White House framed the move as a part of a broader campaign to combat narcotics and organized crime, but Trump's language went much further, explicitly calling Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro illegitimate and threatening to choke off the country's main source of revenue, oil. Oil is the lifeline of Venezuela's economy. It accounts for more than half of government's revenue, and despite years of sanctions, Venezuela continues exporting crude, largely through a shadow fleet of aging tankers operating in legal gray zones. According to maritime intelligence firms, around 40% of black market ships moving Venezuelan oil are already under U.S. sanctions. Trump's blockade threatens to physically enforce those sanctions using U.S. naval power. The impact was immediate. Some oil tankers began diverting course or idling in port. Global oil prices rose. Venezuela's oil traffic showed signs of disruption. Caracas responded furiously. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez accused Trump of violating international law, free navigation, and Venezuelan sovereignty, calling the blockade a reckless and grave threat. Venezuela says it will formally denounce the United States at the United Nations. President Nicolas Maduro went further, calling the move U.S. piracy and urging international protests by oil workers, shipping unions, and merchant mariners worldwide. Venezuela's defense minister has announced a full mobilization of armed forces vying to defend the country's airspace and territorial waters. Pro-government groups warned that any escalation would provoke consequences Washington could not control. Still, Venezuela's state oil company PDVSA says exports are continuing normally, and notably, Chevron shipments to the U.S. appear unaffected. Now here's where things get serious. Under the UN Charter, the threat or use of force against another country's territorial integrity or political independence is prohibited. Naval blockades imposed without a declaration of war or UN Security Council approval are widely considered illegal. The backlash has not just come from Caracas. In Washington, lawmakers from both parties have raised alarm. Democratic Representative Joaquin Castro has called the blockade unquestionably an act of war. Others warn Trump is escalating hostilities without congressional authorization. A war powers resolution is now expected to be voted on, aiming to block military action against Venezuela unless Congress explicitly approves it. Internationally, the concern is now mounting. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum urged the UN to intervene and prevent bloodshed, offering Mexico as a mediator. Brazil's President Lula da Silva warned that words must outweigh weapons or called for dialogue. China, Venezuela's largest oil buyer, condemned what it called U.S. unilateral bullying and reaffirmed support for Venezuelan sovereignty, though without committing to military backing. One would ask how we got here. U.S.-Venezuela relations weren't always hostile. The U.S. recognized Venezuela in 1835, and for much of the 20th century, American companies dominated its oil sector. That relationship soared after Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, nationalizing industries and openly challenging U.S. influence. Under Nicolas Maduro, tensions deepened. Sweeping U.S. sanctions, Washington recognizing opposition leader Juan Guaido in 2019, allegations of coup attempts and regime change efforts. Though there was brief sanctions relief in 2023 tied to election talks, those measures were rolled back, and now Trump's blockade marks the most aggressive step yet. This crisis also exposes a striking case of American double standards. The U.S. has condemned Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports as illegal and an act of war. It has warned China against restricting navigation in the South China Sea, yet Washington is now threatening a naval blockade of Venezuela without UN approval against a country it is not formally at war with. That's one. Second is, the Trump has labeled Venezuela a foreign terrorist state, but legally only the U.S. State Department can make that designation, and it has not done so. Third, Washington accuses Caracas of stealing oil, yet for decades U.S. companies controlled Venezuela's oil industry, and even today American firm Chevron continues operating under special licenses largely untouched by the blockade. And finally, while the U.S. urges other nations to respect democratic checks and balances, this blockade risks military confrontation without clear congressional authorization. To critics worldwide, the message is clear: international law for others, flexibility for America. The big question: what comes next? Is this about drugs and sanctions or regime change? Critics argue the blockade risks triggering a military confrontation, disruption to global energy markets, a dangerous precedent for unilateral force. Supporters say it's long overdue pressure on an authoritarian regime. What's clear is this: Trump's move has shifted the standoff from diplomacy and sanctions to the edge of military conflict. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Rabinder Sachdev. He's the author and founder of Imagindia Institute. He joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Sachdev, for joining us again. Good to see you. Thank you. Now looking at this, does the U.S. naval blockade violate international law, and what recourse does Venezuela have at the moment at the UN?
Theoretically, I do think that the US not only blockade, various other US actions have been in violation of quote unquote international law. Shooting down on the
Yes.
boats, shooting down on the survivors, and this blockade. So these are violations of what could traditionally be thought to be international law. Secondly, what are Venezuela's options? Pretty much not much. Sure, it will go and appeal or raise the issue in fora and forums like the United Nations, some other sympathetic forums or grouping of countries or individual countries, but that does not matter. So Venezuela, in one sense, does not have any options. And coming back to the US, what US is doing is in violations of the law. But then again, in the world of today in which we live, not much can be done about it. Yes, various countries and groupings are talking about it, raising the issue. But given what we see of American foreign policy now, once they decide or they want to go in a certain way, more or less they go down that path. They do not listen to anyone. And in addition to the reasons and the background that you mentioned about, the issues for which United States blames Maduro and Venezuela, narco trafficking, of course, uh, and such. Uh, the Trump government is now also calling for uh, what to say, remuneration, not remuneration, payback of the American oil assets which were nationalized by Venezuela over the past few decades. In the 1970s, since the 1970s, you mentioned Chevron. Yeah, Chevron has been there, and Chevron has a special waiver from the American government to continue its oil business in Venezuela. But Venezuela had nationalized its, oil facilities way back in late 1970s and growing more and more. When Chavez came, he nationalized all of them clearly. And that has been one sore point for America and American oil companies. Some of them went to the courts also. And in 2014, I think an arbitration court said that yes, Venezuela had nationalized the assets of one of the company. I think ExxonMobil. Chevron is still there. ExxonMobil had been nationalized in a wrongful manner. So Venezuelan government owed or should pay ExxonMobil $1.4 billion. That was the damage, estimated way back in 2014. Now, what Trump is saying is that, Venezuelan oil industry has been built up by our oil companies and they nationalize those assets. So Venezuela should pay us back or compensate us for the losses that our oil companies faced. This adds one complete new, reason, excuse me, for the stance which America is taking. So it seems to me that the US is digging in. Okay, any other reason they can think of, they want to make up or could be real, or they might be exaggerating. There could be some, germs of truth to it, or the US may be exaggerating. But the US right now seems to be going I mean, all cylinders firing. And the objective does seem to me now to be regime change in Venezuela.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that. And how does the U.S. justify, condemning Russia and warning China over naval blockades while threatening one against Venezuela without UN approval?
Well, that's the reality of international affairs, apples and oranges, or let's say of terrorism.
Yeah.
Your terrorist is my freedom fighter, and my terrorist is your freedom fighter. So America, sure, it condemns what China could be doing or is doing with respect to Taiwan or a blockade or some such, or what Iran could also be attempting, in the Persian Gulf. But and those America things, from America's standpoint of view, those are wrong steps. But from its point of view, its own blockade of Venezuela is justified, and the reasons for justification are what we've been discussing so far. So America feels justified in this blockade, and not only the blockade. Once again, I'm reminding the shooting down of the boats, killing of survivors in open seas. So America thinks that that is kosher for it to be doing.
Yes, indeed. And could this move set a precedent for unilateral military coercion by major powers in other parts of the world, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It does set a precedent. It opens up the path, and that's why, in my sense, my thesis is that humanity and leaders are heading back to the jungle. We are becoming more and more might as right. It's the law of the jungle now. So, in other areas, in other regions, if there's a comparatively, or a dispute between any two nations, the one who's more powerful would absolutely look at this as a precedent. And not only this, I mean, the past 1 year, I think there are several other precedents also which which could lead leaders to think along those lines. And we are seeing it happening in some way or the other. I mean, be it in Latin America, be it in Europe, be it in Asia, be it in the Middle East. Look at what Israel Netanyahu are doing all along, not listening to anyone in the world.
Yes, indeed. Very dangerous time. Now, what are Venezuela's options for maintaining its oil exports under this blockade, and how might global energy markets respond?
Great question. See, as Venezuela does not have many options other than protesting, okay, raising the issue, protesting and yelling murder, but that means nothing. So that's one. But it does have some options, more active diplomacy. It already has ongoing. It depends. Russia is issuing statements, but how do statements matter to the United States? China is issuing statements in support of Venezuela, but how does that affect or impact President Trump? It does not. Okay. The UN may pass a resolution. How does it matter? It does not matter. But there could be some things happening. Of course, I mean, Venezuela is. I mean, on the one hand, they're arming themselves with guns and all, but that's of no use, absolutely, against American, missiles and long distance bombs, etc. Right? Cuba is there, but to what extent and how? So it would be pretty interesting to see as to how Venezuela can, can somehow respond, or in which way it could respond. To me, at present, it seems it does not, it has a very bad hand.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Robinder Sachdev for bringing your deep insight and sharing with us on a
Thank you.
deep dive. Thank you very much. Now, this is all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us on Deep.